Okay. Zoomers, can you hear me? A thumbs up? Okay, good, good. Do you have materials from the back? I haven't done this particular class in a long time. It's a concept class. Of course, it's based on the contracts, the transactions, all the things we do. And we'll find that these are concepts that we kind of know, but it's not what we're implementing. It's need to make sure we're on board with what we're implementing. You understand the concepts. A significant amount of time that I spend in what I do is trying to keep it from going from somebody unhappy, somebody sending a demand letter, somebody sending me a complaint, and trying to keep that from going to either a track complaint or a lawsuit. And we've been pretty successful at it, working with the agent, working with the people who were unhappy. Sometimes you just go, what's going on here? How can people even think that? I got a blistering phone call from not even a client of ours, just a person in a neighborhood that two agents were farming in the neighborhood, sending out, flyers, information, things like that. And these are two good agents. And it's sometimes, these particular agents are good people. They're really two very good agents. And they just put a little thing in there and they reference to a Bible verse. And this lady was furious. You don't think I don't know what they're doing? They are inferring that I'm not a good Christian. That's what they're doing. I could by sticking that in there, that's what they're, and I don't ever want to see anything from those people again. I'm going, how do you pull that out of that? I mean, where's it coming from? When another
She knows it.
I mean, so yeah, she probably not. So I had another, and this was a prospective seller who went to about, yes, sir.
Did you tell her to go get a dog and name it Life, and then you'll have one? You'll have a life.
That's a good suggestion, yeah. So this other couple, our agent went out on a listing presentation. And she called me, and usually when the call finally gets to me, they're really unhappy. And she was furious. So this was a couple of our agents who went out, like a listing presentation. They were there for a couple hours. And she was furious about it. She said, these people, they just kept going on and on about how they were great and how they were tops in the whole company and and it was a man and a woman agent, where she said, at least he asked. So he asked, you need to go to the bathroom. She asked me to go to the bathroom and yeah, fine. So instead of going to the bathroom right by where we were, he went to our master bedroom, went to the master bedroom bathroom. You don't think I knew what he was doing? He was snooping. That's what he was doing. He was snooping. And her final description of him says, you know what? He's arrogant and she's obnoxious. I talked to the agents about this meeting. She said, you know what? We don't know where that's coming from. So we kept trying to get out of there. They kept us for a couple of hours. They evidently had some home brew that they were offering up. They were laughing, having a great time. And their expression as we released is, we absolutely, as soon as we're ready, we're going to list with you. How is that two dramatically differences views of the same meeting? And it happens all the time. People, and most of the time when they have that opportunity to vent and yell and scream and go through the process, and I'm as you would hope, I'm generally very receptive. I don't tell them to go get a dog. I say, I've got an agent who suggests for you. I'll send Tommy to you, but, and once they've had that opportunity to vent, they kind of just, well, realize that's all I can do kind of thing. So as we talk about some of these concepts, we're going to try to get a good sense of language, what we say and how we say it. Use of words like we, as opposed to give them an impression that we're kind of involved in the decision making. We'll see that when we get into the big picture conversation. And it's going to be valuable for me to get a sense of what you're doing and how you're doing it. And Zoomers, I really want you to make sure that you're ready to unmute and talk to us and give us your views.
I just wanted to sit next.
But I appreciate that. I would.
We good? So just a good, Zoomers, can you see me okay? Thumbs up. Are we good? Hear me and all that? Good. So first thing we're going to talk about are rebates. And looking at the next thing, we see the difference between rebates and referrals. Typical rebate, although I also talk about seller, but the typical rebate scenario is to a buyer. And it's very important that we have very unique.
Got it. When I was just.
Okay.
Everybody got one?
Okay.
Thanks.
Rest of mine.
You what?
Do you need one, Tom? Tommy said, no, he has one. Tommy's the second one. Is he- oh, yeah.
Well, Tommy is job security for me, so it worked out really well. So the concept is, if you're going to give a rebate to a buyer, the agreement to do that has to be in writing. It should be in a buyer representation agreement, typically paragraph 17, special provisions. And you've got examples of language right here that establishes that you've got to have an approval in writing from their lender if there's financing. And it has to be on the settlement statement. The challenge that we have, I mean, we all understand that concept. I mean, we're all pretty good with that. Yeah, we're going to rebate the buyer. We need to have an agreement to do that. And these are the requirements. I think most of us understand that if you're going to rebate a buyer and they're, have financing, their lender has to be involved. I think most of us are pretty much, anybody have any questions about that? Is everybody pretty good with that concept? Because the lender needs to know about all monies coming to the buyer. When they're going to approve a buyer's financing, they need to know where all the money is. So if they're getting a rebate for a few $1,000s in commission from their agent or even the other agent, lender has to know about it and the lender has to approve it as you work through that. And the reason we've got to have that language in writing is so if the lender does not approve it, and we can say to the buyer, our agreement was that this had to be done for us to rebate you. And if this isn't done, if it's not approved by your lender, we can't rebate you. Because if we don't do that, when we promise a rebate on the run in the wording, just verbal or whatever like that, and then things change and we don't give it to them, then they file complaints. And they have. So we got to make sure that they understand the language what's done. Now, there's a challenge in the whole rebate thing. And I mentioned in here that the whole concept of rebating money is a very slippery slope. You've got to really get good feedback from your buyer from day one on who they are, how they think, what's going on with them. We had one just happened fairly recently. And there was a conversation at the very beginning about rebate. And it actually was properly in the buyer rep agreement. It was $700. And then later, in the midst of the transaction, moving forward, in contract now, moving forward, in a builder deal, he said, well, we talked to our cousin and he bought a new home and his agent gave him back almost all the commission. And they now were wanting $7,000. And there was an original conversation about $700. you have to be in tune, that happens. People during the process, all of a sudden get words from their realtor friends or from their cousin or from their whoever. Particularly happens more on builder deals than almost anything else. Because they see that as just, well, all you did was, in fact, you didn't even take us to the house. You just called the builder up and say, hey, we're coming by, put them down, write their name down, and you didn't do anything, and you expect to get all that commission. That's just not right. And so we have that happen a lot. So you've got to kind of be in tune. You've got to make sure right up front, before you spend a lot of time, energy, and money, to understand how they're going to act as they move forward, and it's going to pop up later. Because you're gonna be faced with, even though you've got a buyer rep agreement with them, you've got good language in it. You're gonna be faced with what you know. I continue to represent them and go through the process, because depending on the builder and their procedure, they may back us up. They may say, well, you know what? That's the agent that we put in on the realtor addendum part of the contract. And that's who we have to pay. And unless they agree, we're not going to release them. So depending on what the builder does, will determine in a lot of ways whether or not we're going to have to fight the battle. We will almost never go to court to enforce something against a buyer. We'll make demand notices. We'll threaten litigation. We'll generally, in fact, we always end up settling. It's incredibly rare. In fact, we've never actually, well, only one case because it was a small claims court, less than $10,000. We've never actually gone to court. And why do you think that's the case? Why do you think we don't try to enforce a buyer rep agreement?
ROI,
Pardon me?
it's not worth it financially.
Well, financially, it is a challenge.
You don't want that negative publicity or.
Well, in some cases, you look at the relationship, you look at what's going on, particularly if you're in a smaller market. You may have relationships and what you do may impact on your relationship in that market. Who's going to make the final decision on the enforceability of the buyer rep agreement? Judge. Judges don't like buyer rep agreements. I mean, across the board, because what you're going to be in is a district court. If you're, and almost always going to be more than 10,000. If you're less than 10,000, small claims court, maybe a little easier to work with. But again, you're now dealing with a JP, his has some experiences. Even in a good buyer representation state like Texas, it's still hard. It's incredibly hard to enforce. And district courts, you're going to have an attorney. It's going to be more expenses. Can be real challenge. So be rare for us to do it. So it's going to be really important as you go through this process to really pay attention to what the buyer is saying and how you think they're feeling and how things are going here. You look at, the relationship where you got these buyers, what's going on, to decide if something like that pops up, how likely is it that that's going to happen? And what are you going to do about it? You work through it. Of course, you call me and say, okay, I got to buy a rep agreement. I've spent all this time, done. Now they want to, what do we do? I have a conversation about it. But it's hard. How you doing, sir? Phil? What's going on?
Doing good.
Do you have some good news for us?
Sitting here trying to learn a little bit today.
Me too,
Yes.
one of the great things I love about teaching these classes is every time I teach a class, I learn something. Some classes I learn more than other classes. Classes I've got Tommy in the class, I'm almost always going to learn a lot because she's got great questions. Then Janet's always got those questions. Because one of the great things about Janet right here on the front row, because she's done this for so long and had so many different sets of experiences. Remember one of my phrases, every transaction you do, tells you what you do in the next transaction. And she'll do it. She'll make those adjustments. She'll learn things and she'll, next day, based on what just happened, we need to do this differently. My agent who just went through the process where the buyers are saying 7,000, not 700. He's made the decision, says, you know what? It's not worth my time, effort, and money. I'm just not going to mess with it. I'll move on. And part of it is there are some relationship issues there that he's got to deal with. But the language is critical. Without the language, you have nowhere to go. You don't have any enforceability. In fact, if it ends up in a TREC complaint, TREC will find us negligent. If we don't have something in writing that creates these conditions, and you have in some way, shape, or form, casually or otherwise, had a conversation with the buyer about some kind of rebate, maybe, and there, in your mind, you said, well, they kind of brought it up, we kind of talked about it, but nothing was agreed to. In their mind, it was. In their mind, when they talked about some kind of a rebate, $1,000, right, half the commission, third of the commission, whatever. In their mind, that was what was agreed to. Otherwise, you wouldn't have continued to show them houses and write offers, those kinds of things. So they're going to perceive this stuff totally different than what you think has been agreed to. And if you don't have anything in writing, and then you discover that in fact, their lender will not approve a rebate, and so you don't pay them a rebate, they can file a TREC complaint and we'd be in trouble. In fact, that was out of our Rockwall office, because we didn't have it in writing, had a TREC complaint. And TREC was very clear after the fact, after closing, in this case, it wasn't a huge amount, it was like $1,500. TREC said, you will pay the buyer. If you don't pay the buyer, the TREC adjuster and enforcement attorney on that transaction, who I unfortunately know well, she's a good person, she's retired since. But she's really good at getting money for the consumer. She said, I can't make you pay them, Bob. You know the amount of administrative fines I can hit you with, and they're in the six figures. So it would be really good for you to pay these people $1,500 and move on, satisfy this complaint. This is absolutely right. Get it?
Somebody has a question on Zoom.
What have I got?
It said, why would a lender not accept a rebate?
Okay, so the question is, why would a lender not accept a rebate? Because they cannot qualify for it. They've already maxed out on any contribution from anyone. Maybe they already have seller contribution in 12A1B of the contract, whatever. So we've got a lender in the room, Colton. Why would a lender not approve a rebate to a buyer?
Yeah, there's seller concession limits. There's concession limits that also depend on the down payment. So for somebody who has a smaller down payment, they're gonna have a smaller threshold of the amount of concessions that they can take. We find that really big when it comes to buy downs. Even for example, people that are wanting to do buy downs, if we want to do a 3-2-1 buy down, that's bigger than a 2-1 buy down. Well, we might actually have to put more down to even qualify for you to receive that amount. There can be really a handful of different ways, but a lot of people don't even know that the down payment's a big thing when it comes to how much you can get contributed by, a third party or a rebate or a concession. So.
Zoomer, can you hear Colton at all? Yes, okay, good. So there are, because concession, not just from the seller, but anything, anywhere. Lender looks at money coming to the buyer from anywhere. Yeah.
So you have a commission with a new buyer, or a new build. Sometimes you have a bonus.
Yeah.
The builders do not want you to use the bonus as a rebate to your buyer. Some won't even allow it. But like, if that's what you're gonna do, we may not be giving that to you.
And see, this gets to one of the things we're going to talk about, and if I don't get back to this, remind me. One of the very last things we're going to talk about are our riskiest transactions. One of them is a builder transaction. We're going to talk about why. That's one of the reasons why. Because of the builder's policies and what they have there. So there are all these types of things that could cause the buyer to not be able to get a rebate. And the buyer who you haven't emphasized in writing in the buyer rep agreement or an amendment to the buyer rep agreement, here's how this works, here's what has to be done. In their mind, they expect it. And by the way, they don't care if it happens at closing. If it doesn't happen at closing, they expect after the fact you to pay the money. And we'll meet out in the back room behind Walmart and, you give us that $1,500 or something. They don't have any sense of things we can and cannot do relating to giving money to them. At closing, she works through it. So that's a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, if you represent the seller and you're going to provide a rebate to a buyer, in addition to all these things, has to be in writing, all that, you have to have permission of your seller. Your client has to give you permission before you can rebate anyone on the other side. So you've got to have that. That's a requirement, both under the laws of agency and on the TREC rules that your seller has to, your client has to agree to that. So you're going to be able to do that. The area of rebates that I like the least are the ones where you're thinking through this a little bit And you're right, it's right at the very beginning, and before, you had the benefit of their having the conversation right up front. That's a good place to have it. And let you know right then, says, here's what we're gonna need. We're gonna need some money here to help us through this deal. And you're looking at the deal and you say, well, I've got a $40,000 commission coming. And they only want 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000. I still come out way ahead. That's a really slippery slope. Because once they start pushing those buttons, how about we get 39,000 and you get 1,000? You're still ahead of the game. How about we just buy your lunch? Would that be okay? I mean, you get to pick where it is. Well, nice little place, southeast coast of Spain, we just go there. Yes, ma'am?
One more thought. With a new build, your job is not done by simply introducing buyer to the builder. They are still your client throughout the whole process. So ideally, you still want to show up for them on inspections, different pieces through. You want to keep an eye on what their lender's doing and what you do, the builder's lender. Same thing with title. You still have a job with a new construction.
Oh, absolutely. We're gonna talk about
It's not
that.
just introduce them and then you get a commission. That's not how that works. This is
Yeah, that's what a lot of,
all the way to close.
that's what a lot of builder sales rep look for. I'm off, see you for the closings, have a nice day kind of thing. Do we have another chat question or something?
No, it was basically the same thing, Colton answered.
Okay.
That was showing 5.
Okay, okay, good. So the rebate thing is really important. It's an incredibly slippery slope. I mean, you would never bring it up. You would never say to them, because in paragraph 11, where we address the commission, you would put 3% in there. And you explain to them, paragraph B, that you're gonna try to get the money from the other side, but if that doesn't happen, they're not gonna pay. Your buyer owes the difference. You should work through that. So you're not gonna say, okay, so 3% is what I get on. Unless you want some of that, would you like some of that 3%? We'll work something out here. You're never gonna bring it up. It's not gonna be your situation to do it. So it's always gonna be them. What you wanna do is make sure it's in a timely manner. Make sure that they do it early enough that you can negotiate this out and get it done. And it's so dramatic. And what happened, one of our agents, and they did, it just swap off. Well, I still make a lot of good money, they convinced me that if they don't get this money, they're not gonna be able to close the deal. You gotta have that money. You still have, they can't do it otherwise. And my agent was furious when they found out after closing that the people went to Hawaii for 2 weeks. Didn't they have money to close? You got to go to Hawaii for a couple of weeks? Really? How's that work? Yes, sir.
I've usually found that people that ask for your money are gonna be the most difficult people. to
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's no end for what they demand.
They just answer no.
And it comes down to how they value what you do.
Yeah.
They don't put a lot of value in what you do. Now, part of that, by the way, is our fault as an industry. We've done a terrible job of educating people. That's why, Colton, you have borrowers all the time that battle over an 1/8 of a point or a fee or whatever, because they don't understand the value of a loan officer.
Yeah, and I think it's good to establish you figuring out where they're at. I think that's what you do. I mean, I'll even ask a question. If I have somebody who comes to me and we're down to, this is no joke, my uncle with his credit union, $17. My family's full of car people, so he's trying to argue with me about $17. And at one point I had to ask my uncle Tommy, what do you think it is that I do? Because it's not me asking him in a rude way, like, you don't know what I do. No, it's truly is, do you really not see what I'm doing? Or is it that you don't know? And is that what you're attributing that dollar amount to? Because in my opinion, if you see what we're doing and if you see what agents like Keller Williams are doing for their people, 3% is a bargain, right? But is it a question of, do they understand what you're doing? And how do you communicate that and bridge that gap? I think
That's exactly right. I cannot imagine. It happens every day. Individuals go through a real estate transaction, sellers and buyers without agents. And they never have a transaction as good as if they had agents. And it just doesn't happen. But because they were able to do it before and because they have a friend who was able to do it, we didn't need agents, so why am I paying you guys anything? We've got to do a better job of educating them on the value of what we do. Any other comments or questions on the rebate? Okay, and then,
I'm
wait,
hearing you say, you think that is 3% that is.
there's 3% what is.
I heard you say you think that company dollar versus like office approval and money you're really giving up.
Yeah, it's a good question. So Janet brings up that 3% that we're receiving BAC from the listing broker. That money comes to our brokerage and then you get some of it. So that's right. What we're really doing is if you're negotiating this out, you're giving up our money or some portion of our money. Now, if you're capped, my response to you, if you're capped, is it's your money. If you want to give up some of your money, as long as we've followed all the other guidelines, that's fine. But if you're not capped, you're giving away our money. And Mr. Brody, who walked by a couple of times, came through, says, you're kind of taking money out of his pocket. You know, he doesn't like that. Although he's a nice guy and a generous guy, he probably doesn't like you giving away his money. But you're right. It's not just them. By the way, as a general rule, it doesn't work to tell them how little you end up getting. You know, I've got a referral fee to pay, I've got to pay money to the broker, you know, I've got the Mercedes payment coming up, I got 3 ex-wives. They don't care. They don't care about what all this, you've got to pay everybody else. All they want to know is their deal. But you're exactly right. It's why if you're gonna give up money in a transaction, you need to have a conversation with leadership. Talk to Jill, talk to me, like whoever, and begin to talk about, here's what we're looking at doing. What are your thoughts? Of course, now with the Denton taking the position, he'd be a great one to talk about because he certainly has the experience to work through it. But it's a good point. And you think through it, says, you know, whose money is this? In some cases, it's all your money. In some cases it is. That's okay. It doesn't mean it's a good idea. Doesn't mean, oh, not a problem. You can make the decision, give up all that money, no problem. Real estate has just become a hobby to you. And hello, Cynthia.
Hello.
So, and by the way, if real estate is a hobby to you, and you have those closing, you just send the money to me. It's not a hobby to me, so kind of work through that, but you're exactly right. You've got to be respectful of the money that you're giving up and whose money it is.
So.
Yes, sir. Thank you, wait, Tisha, and then you.
Oh, that was, yeah, I just wanted to, you mentioned where would you put the rebate on?
Paragraph 17, special provision of the buyer rep agreement, or amend the buyer rep agreement.
That's all.
Yep. Sure.
So, question, when I had that issue I talked to you about, on that rebate. Someone had told me, and I'm just clarifying this. Is it like when you, like if you took 2% instead of 3%? Would that ever be with since it's on the MLS for 3%? Would the office ever treat that like we're gonna get our 3% no matter what? And if you're gonna give up something, that's only gonna come out of your little split portion of it.
Yeah, whatever you get will show up on the CDA. Whatever you're going to show the credit to the buyer on CDA, as well as show up on the settlement statement. As you work through that. The other part of this, you have to be very careful how you do this so that you don't end up with a tax consequence. That you don't end up with getting charged for some money that you didn't get. As you work through that. It can be a little bit of a challenge. You made me think about something else in dealing with the rebate situation. The way the language, like in my example here, said buyer's aid agrees to rebate 20% of the commission. Sometimes you'll see people put language in there, like you're going to give up a percent. You get a 3% commission, you get 1%. But if you write that where buyer's aid agrees to rebate 1% of the 3% commission. Let's say the 3% commission is $3,000. What's 1% of $3,000? $30. So technically, that's all there is. So people, well, I assume that you knew what I meant was, 3%, 1%, I get a third of that. Well, that's not what it says. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I don't think you answered his question. At least you didn't answer it in satisfaction to me. I thought the same thing, that there were transactions where the office isn't going to agree to it. But if you say, okay, but I want to give them $1,000 back, that's fine, but it's coming out of your $1,000. Like it's not coming out of the company dollar. So that's what he's asking.
Yeah,
you.
okay, so if you do that, we'll do the split, 70-30 split, and then out of your 70%, we'll take the rebate. So it won't come off the top.
And so like, that's what I was, my
Yeah,
coach told me that's how that you didn't want to be careful because you would end up losing money on
the only
it.
thing that comes out the top are referral fees. But if you're gonna do a rebate after the split with your broker, then out of your part, you're gonna have to pay that rebate.
So the brokerage still gets their.
They get their 30%.
Full amount,
Yes,
and then I give.
you have to give up the rebate out of your part.
And that's the way it is across the board generally, right?
Yes, across the board.
But that's not how I heard you explain it.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. You know, being an old guy, I don't talk as good as I used to. So.
You did have a birthday recently.
You know what I did? And I'm looking forward to 9 years and 49 days for my 90th birthday party. I'm just saying, I'm thinking I'm ready.
Planning it already.
Yes.
I am, and my family does a great job of putting that stuff together. I don't think they can even handle that. I have a fairly long line in my family. My great grandmother on my dad's side lived to like 96, 97. And her two things that she did, she played 42, dominoes 42, every day, played all the time. This was disgusting. She chewed tobacco, she had snuff. I mean, literally, to like the day she died, she was playing dominoes. So just get right on to one side.
Say chew tobacco.
Tobacco and so I'm looking to, you know, and I need that extra time. You know, I'm really challenging me to learn, figure things out. So I need that extra time. But that makes sense. That's a good clarification, but it comes out of your side of the deal. As you work through it.
7%.
You're 70%. Whatever you're giving up that if you're giving them 1% or 3% commission, it's coming out of, but you receive that 70%, which should make you think about it a little harder.
Yeah.
Right, because that 1% out of your 70% is 1% of the big whole 3%.
So if it's a $3,000 commission, that after you do the split and you're sitting there with what, 2,000? And you're gonna pay them 1,000, it comes out of your side. And depending on how much time, energy, money you spend on this fire, you could be in the hole. Very, very quickly, very easily.
That's what they were explaining.
Yeah. So
Well, and then the other thing to think about that we hadn't addressed, there's so many agents out there on MLS offering 2% commissions
Yep.
and 2.5% commissions. So you're not specific. If you're putting a dollar amount and you go sell them a Lennar home that only gives you 1% now, but during the heyday, they were only giving you $1,000 commission. So if you promise $2,000 commission and they bought a Lennar home, then
it's
you're
a
out
good
of
point
pocket and
that
stuff.
you want to be very careful and probably not put dollar amounts, but percentages of what you receive at closing. Whatever you receive at closing, because if you receive a much smaller amount, if you're going to pay them, like my example here, 20% of the commission you receive at closing. Otherwise, you could find yourself money out of pocket.
So for best practices sake,
Just don't give them.
never just give them your.
Just say no.
Just say no.
No, sorry, can't help it. And then before you totally show them out the door, refer them to one of those agents you don't like, hopefully not anybody in our company,
Yeah.
and get a referral fee. Yeah,
Always remember, it's not a true 70-30 split. It's because you have the KWRI.
64 is 64.
36
Yep.
until you cap, and that's
Yep.
why we try to help you cap ASAP.
Yeah, it's a good point. You need to look at what the actual dollars are going to be as you do the deal. Yeah. What?
Too, so really what you're getting at.
No, you don't pay taxes on it because they put it through the CPA.
Yeah, because you don't receive it.
Reflected as your income.
So you don't receive it as income, so it's not a tax event under those circumstances. Hold it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one, thanks for talking about rebates and new builds. On the 16th, they're gonna be signing a bill that is actually not gonna allow them to have standard interest rates. I lost the deal to my own cousin, this was Tommy's son, so this is why I don't make sense with that side of the family. He was getting a 4.5% interest rate when rates were actually right around 7%. That's gonna be something after the 16th that builders are no longer gonna be able to do is set out standard interest rates for buyers. So
So
for
they're
us,
no longer able to advertise interest rates.
we're not gonna be able to advertise and just give out 4.5%. Now, the one thing I do see on the backside is I don't know how it's gonna be enforced. Unless people are just tattletelling, but truly, I wouldn't have clients banking on that if they have been recently. I do know some
Now,
also,
what level is this gonna be addressed? Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac,
oh, it's federal level.
federal?
Yeah, they're not gonna allow these builders to come in and completely scalp all the lending, and then also on the back end, they're hitting each. I used to work for a company that owned a builder as well. And I saw the numbers and how they can make it work, and those discounts are getting hit one way or another, but there's never a flat line. So this is just something I wanted to say because we're talking about rebates.
So the 16th February
Yes, sir.
in Congress doing this.
Yep.
15.
You know, we should take a picture. Congress actually did something. That's pretty good. It's got that.
Well, it's 16, now hold on, we gotta wait till.
Okay, so Janet asked, what's the problem is?
No, what had the problem been, so I don't understand.
That's their, that's
What was
their
the
making
need
this
for
change.
this?
That's what she's asking. Colton is who we're asking.
What was the need? Understanding what the problem was they're fixing.
I guess it is a fair lending side, like, for example, if you have somebody who they can qualify at that interest rate. And then on the background, there is no regulation on how they work the numbers, so if I'm selling Tommy a house, I'm selling it to $400,000, giving discounts. To 4.5%. Y'all don't see on the back end what it takes for my margins to get there. So for example, if I have Tommy come in and I have Cynthia come in and they both buy the exact same house, exact same program, because of how your loan level price adjustments, credit, down payment and everything, it could actually cost me a lot more for Tommy than it does Cynthia. But the question is how are builders auditing themselves and showing the numbers, showing that somehow one way or another, he's actually not going to be paying more on the back end. Because the idea is this is equal,
So disclosing all the numbers.
yes, this is equal housing for everybody. And so you do find some discrimination times with that. And also, depending on where the neighborhoods are at, can be seen as discrimination as well, depending on
Little bit
where
of
the
red lining
offering
going on.
is. So the idea is that it needs to be an equal playing field.
That was one of the big changes from the HUD settlement statement and where we made the changes and all that, where you had to disclose numbers and everything, and after in the CD, you set that out, you could make it changes except for under certain circumstances. Because they were really pushing to make sure the consumer knew, as they were comparing loans, and comparing lenders, what the true cost were. That's kind of what you're talking about there.
Yep.
Yeah, good. Okay, excellent. Okay, any more questions on rebate before we get to referrals? The thing, and Tommy explained it better than anyone. When you're discussing rebates, you just need to learn to say no.
Just saying.
No. You know what? I really like to do it. But the top agent in our office, Tommy Thompson, says no. I always follow his advice. He's a good man.
Yes.
Occasionally he fixes popcorn.
I got a whole new box of it back there.
Yeah, I'm waiting. I'm good. Okay, referral language. Keeps me up at night. On the one hand, our clients have a right to benefit from our sets of experiences. We say, oh, you need name of a good inspector? Well, Google them up. Problem. Because then if they find a really bad inspector, they're gonna blame us for not helping. So we do need to do that, but we've got to do it in a way that they don't find that we're in some way pushing them in one direction or the other. And some of the language we use, and we've got it on our wall in there, we talk about preferred vendors. What they hear when we say that is this is who you need to use. If you'll use this lender, this inspector, this attorney, this title company, everything's fine. No problem. If you read a problem, we'll help you take care of it. Because, it's came about it. It's really not your lender, it's our lender. It's not your title company, it's our, how we do the referral, it's a real balancing act. Because they do need to benefit from our sets of experiences. One of the things you've got to do, and you've got it in your packet on the next page, is you've got the vendor list, the vendor policy form. Cannot give anybody any names of any vendors until they've signed this. What this tells them is, here's some names, here's a list. People either we've had good experience with, or someone who we respect has had a good experience, but it's not a recommendation. It's not an endorsement. We're not saying if you use them, there'll never be a problem. Because one of the things we know about everyone we do business with, every vendor we do business with, we know that somebody's gonna screw up. Somebody's gonna make a mistake. That's a fact of life, because you're all human. What we rely on, I mean, Colton, he's gonna mess up alone. And you will. If you haven't, you will. He's young.
That's done before.
But here's what we look at. How does he fix it? How does he recover from it? How does he own up to it and go through the process? That's what tells us who we can use. Because everybody's gonna make a mistake. All the inspectors, the vendors, everybody. So when you give them the information, try to avoid one name. We see this a lot with our teams who have their preferred vendor, preferred lender, for example. And that's who they say. And then they'll have language like, yeah, it's who we use all the time. He does a great job, gets our loans through in a timely manner, everything is good. What's the buyer just heard? What did they just hear from you?
This is who you need to use.
This is who you need to use. We're telling you, use these people. If you use these people, everything's fine. You'll never have any problems. Everything will be good. So when a problem does occur, who are they gonna look to? You. Because you're the one that, say, oh yeah, here's how you use it as you work through the process. In the transaction we're going through right now. And I don't see her, can't see all the names. It's a new bill deal. And we're using our client's using the builder's preferred lender. And when you go to the builder's website, you see how they talk about, in the main part of the website where they talk about their company, they use customer price satisfaction over and over. They talk about, highest level of service like that. And then when you pull down the financing, they talk about the preferred lenders. They talk about the lenders that they work with, top lenders. And then again, satisfaction, they talk about all those things. Well, I think they need to be held as accountable as we're held. Because we're held accountable all the time for what we say and what we do. I think this can't just be nice sounding marketing phrases from a builder. They need to know this is how we expect them to do business as you work through that process. So when you're referring out, try not to refer just one person, especially if it's that one lender or that one inspector that your team uses a lot. You certainly can include them on the list. You gotta be careful, because if they walk away thinking this is who we need to use, they're telling us that we don't use these people. Ideally, in a finance standpoint, frankly, if they've got a lender that they want to choose, that's better. Sorry, Colton, but if there's a problem with that lender, we have no liability because they chose them, and we're going to remind them of that. And then we're going to offer up, Colton, so here's somebody who's really good at fixing this problem. So anyway, but you've got to go through the process and give them multiple choices, if at all possible. When you look at all the vendors, make sure you use the vendor policy form, work through the process. You got to sign off on that. And don't just have this be another piece of paperwork they sign off on. Stop and talk to them about this. This is what this really means. You need to really be in tune with this. Because they need to walk away from the conversation feeling good about being able to benefit from your sets of experiences. At the same time, you're providing them with information so they can make decisions. You're not the decision maker. You work through that. You've got to be able to do that. Now, one of the things I talk about on this page is attorneys, and that's a special category.
Boy, is it.
When we're going to refer an attorney, it's because something is happening in the transaction. And we're wise enough to know, you know what, this is a legal issue. I can't take care of it for you. I can't resolve it. You need to seek legal advice. The way you advise them to seek legal advice is important. And one of our challenges with attorneys, depending on the nature of a legal issue, we may not have more than one or two names. Because what we want is an attorney who has expertise in that area. Maybe it's a financing issue, maybe it's a construction issue. Maybe it's a general real estate thing, and we got a number of attorneys who can handle that. You may even have, depending on the nature of what it is, you may be able to send them to Charles Kramer, Gary Mulligan, or Brandy Dosser, one of our title company attorneys, someone like that, who may be able to help them situations like that. But if you're going to send them to an attorney, you need to make sure they understand several things. One, there's no guarantee. One, we're telling them this is an issue, that's a legal issue, you need to seek legal advice. Now, they're not required to do that. You need to be clear about that. They can do it or not do it. We have to advise them. And so you say, you know what? Here's some attorneys that we've worked with. In most cases, most of the attorneys that we send the names of are attorneys who actually have represented us as an office, who represent some of our agents, who've gotten the name. For example, Chase Garrett is one of them, and Cheryl McCarty is one who introduced me to him, and we visited. He's actually done some work for our office as well as for other agents. And he's a general real estate attorney kind of thing with a little firm. Robert Miller with Prager Miller has actually represented this office in some transactions, some lawsuits and E&O suits. So we've got some experiences with these people. Doesn't mean there are any guarantees. Doesn't mean they're going to be able to take care of the issue. What we look to for the most part from the attorneys that we're going to send over or give them the names is that these attorneys do a good job of looking at and listening to them and not charging them anything to find out if they can help. Say, you know what? Yeah, I can help you, but it's going to cost you more than it's worth. Here's the deal. Robert Miller does a good job of that. And then we say, but if you choose to work with that attorney, if they do any legal work for you, including review of documents, there may be legal fees, and you're totally responsible for that. One of the things that we need to remember, Greg has a specific rule that prohibits us from paying directly or indirectly our clients' legal fees. The rules Greg cannot do. They need to understand it's going to be their responsibility to go through on that. Yes, ma'am.
So what exactly would you want us to put in writing? Can you give us a phrase or a sentence, how you want it worded?
Well, first of all, you got the vendor list policy form. You always have to sign off on that. And then as you send them names, you'll send them in an email generally.
Right.
I say, here's some attorneys that we've had good experience with, and then you'll tell them, it's been no guarantee, and this language is in this form right here. There's no guarantees. If there are any legal fees involved, your responsibility as you work through this. They need to know that as you deal with it. And if it's an area that's specialized, I've only got right now 2 attorneys who have high levels of certification dealing with construction. One is Mark Davis, and the other one is Robert Miller. Robert Miller is one of the few attorneys I have who actually still does litigation. Many of the other attorneys would be glad at giving advice, writing letters, but they're not going to do litigation. A lot of attorneys don't want to go to court. The timelines, the duties, the labor intensive is a real challenge as you work through it. But you're going to do that. You say, and you're also going to say, when you call the attorney, use our name. So they'll know how they got your name. So the attorney will know why they're calling them, because that helps a little bit. Because we got a relationship with the attorney and they're going to generally work with us in the situation. They've got to understand the reason we're sending you to an attorney, or the reason we're giving you attorney references, is we're dealing with a legal issue that we cannot help you with. And you need to recognize that. There's a fine line. We're going to see this in our next thing and deal with the language stuff. There's a fine line between just automatically saying, oh, that looks a little tricky, you better talk to an attorney about that. Or trying to help them work through it and finally see, okay, here's why this really is a legal issue. This is an issue because what we're dealing with are issues within this contract between you and the other party. And these are things that we cannot advise you on because they literally are illegal. We can't tell you that the other party is in default. Default's a legal issue. And if you want to know what your rights are to hold the other party in default, you talk to an attorney, maybe he wants to help you with a notice of default opportunity here, you'll send out and do that. So that's kind of the why that we're doing that. So you really need to talk to somebody and help with that. But attorneys are such a special category. You've got to, you certainly have to be responsible and let them know this is a legal issue and here's what they really need to do and deal with the legal issue. I will tell you that at least half the time, they're not going to call an attorney. It's not going to do it. And they don't want to spend the money. They say, you know what, we'll figure it out, we'll work it out, we'll whatever. Or they'll call their cousin who's a good divorce attorney. It's not going to help at all. We don't want any of those other attorneys anywhere in the room. We want good real estate attorneys involved in the transaction, presuming it's a real estate issue. And if we're going to tell them to talk to an attorney, it's going to be a real estate issue. Otherwise, we'd be involved at all anyway. But you've got to walk that line. You've got to say, you know, here's some people we've got experience with, make sure they sign the vendor policy form. And make them feel comfortable, because we want them to know that we're providing service to them, that they're going to benefit from our sets of experiences. But we also need for them to know we understand our limitations. The things we cannot do. And it's not just a liability issue, it's a bad service to the client issue. Because if you do some things that you really don't have the authority to do, they'll see you as a safety net. So if anything goes wrong, you're kind of there to fix it. And we're not. Can't fix it, just can't be done. So you've got to make sure you really are careful and working through that. Question on the attorney thing. I would ask you, by the way, same thing, Zoomers, hope you're able to hear me. What I would ask you to do is, as you have experience with attorneys, give me those names so I can visit with those attorneys and see how receptive they are to us calling for quick legal questions. Some attorneys are very user-friendly on that. Some attorneys say, yeah, absolutely, give me a call. And by the way, here's my rate. And a quick 15-minute phone call, you have $100. You guys, ooh, well, or you're gonna write a letter or something like that. So have to be a little careful and work through that. But so as you have experience with attorneys, please let me know, because I want to talk to the attorney and visit with them about our situation, what's going on. I've had a few attorneys over the years who reached out to me and say, you know, attorney, I do real estate. I know from time to time you probably have real estate legal issues, and I want to be a resource. I don't have nearly as many of those as I'd like to have. Which surprised me a little bit, because most of the attorneys out there who are not in large firms every day scrambling for business. I mean, it's a tough industry to be in right now. Some ways worse than what we're going through. You've got to convince somebody to sue somebody and go through all the whole process. If you're in a large firm, the few agents I have in large firms, Thompson Co. and a couple like that, you generally get some kind of conversation, but they're really quick to get the meter running. Start charging. So because they're under the gun with their firm. You know, their firm is looking at billable hours, what they're doing, how they're doing it. It's hard to get free stuff out of them. I mentioned your environment, we talked about it directly, but also occasionally you'll have a client say, well, Bob, why don't you get your office's attorney, your firm's attorney? You know, we don't have an attorney. We don't have an in-house attorney. And they need to understand, because they'll look at us having an attorney to be able to take care of the legal issue, whatever it might be. We don't have. They just need to know that, but you know, we don't want to make that as a limitation kind of thing, but they should understand it. So it's not in our business model. We have resources, we have attorneys that we like to call. As friends in a legal firm that we use them for a number of different things. We don't have an in-house attorney. We don't have someone that we can quickly and easily go to. I would, a few firms have. I'd love to have an in-house attorney on retainer. Be great. That we could provide that. Now, it's not a total problem solver. There's some things that happen when you do that. It encourages them to maybe use you more than they should, and see that as a crutch. You kind of work through it. Is everybody good with referral? Can you refer vendors, by the way? Lenders, title companies, inspectors, contractors, roofers, foundation companies, structural engineers, all those kind of people. I mentioned earlier, try to have multiple names. I'm gonna use the policy form, but when you're doing that, your client needs to understand is your thing somewhere. There needs to be a reason why you're sending them to a structural engineer or a roofer or a foundation company. Why would you typically be doing that? Why would you send them to a structural engineer or a foundation company or something like that? Why are you doing that?
Because he's the problem, the foundation.
Like a result of the
inspection.
Okay, so let's take foundation. How do you know there's foundation issue? An inspection, not from you.
Right.
You have no foundation expertise. I mean,
Well, I mean,
He carries an air pump with him for the tires.
yeah. I mean, you know, when I go list a house, I can walk the house and think and say that, you know, this is moving a little bit more than maybe it should. You might want to.
okay, now that's the right direction. I'm not saying you got foundation issues, but saying you need to have somebody look at this. Yeah, that's the direction. That's the resource you are. Sometimes it's you going through things, looking at stuff. Many times you'll find the seller's already been thinking about that. So, yeah, we noticed that. What should we do about that? Kind of thing. Somebody will come in the truck inspector. Now, a truck inspector shouldn't say, you've got foundation issues. You've got a bad roof. He should say, here's some things you need to research. You need to have a foundation company come out, some further inspections, contractor, whatever. That's what the inspector should be saying, truck inspector. So often you'll have it in that way. Now, your challenge is, and foundation is a good example. If your seller says, yeah, you know, kind of in preparation, so we can deal with this head on. We probably want to have some foundation companies come out and give us an estimate, take a look, and let us know. What they need to know now is that foundation company comes out and provides a report if they have something to disclose.
You tell them that too.
Yes, you do. Yeah, and what say is, they need to know that's the risk. They need to know that's a decision they've got to make, because they now have something that they may need to disclose as you work through that. If there is a foundation problem that could become a lender required repair. Anytime you've got a lender required repair and you get that information to the lender, you've now put the lender in maybe more control of the transaction than this buyer would want. I need to understand. For this lender who now has this information, it's going to become a lender required repair. You now have certain things that have to be done, or have to be negotiated with the buyer, and between the buyer and the seller, or this thing won't get done. And so they need to understand this risk. Buyer needs to understand if they have certain inspections done and something becomes a lender required repair, which most times is going to come from like the appraisal or something from the inspection report. This puts a non-party, which is what a lender is, in a significant level of control on the transaction. And the buyer's either going to have to deal with what that lender has said or get another lender who's going to ignore the fact that the house is kind of thing.
Moving like a train out.
So you've got to be very careful as you go through that. You deal with it. Janet?
So to clarify, there's a difference between a structural engineer and a foundation company. A
And here's,
structural engineer has no skin in the game. So they're just giving you their professional opinion of how the house measures.
okay, so Janet brings up an important point, difference between foundation companies and structural engineers. A structural engineer is charging a fee and doing a professional job. What you need to understand is if I send 3 structural engineers out on the same house on the same day, I'll get 3 different reports. In spite of how scientific and so forth and precise it's supposed to be, you're still dealing with their opinion. And every one of the structural engineers have certain preferences. You got a couple that says, well, the problem with this is roots. Prince Ranger solve this. Another says they don't talk about that, talk about some other kinds of things as you work through it. Now, foundation companies, in some ways, have a bad rap because we say they're coming out looking for a job. And at some level, many of them are. Now, some of the best ones that are really good, and there are some that are really good, They're gonna provide a good report, they're gonna do measurements, they're gonna give you good information. And if I need something, fine, if you don't need something, they'll tell you that, and they're good, you know, structural engineers or structural foundation is one of the ones that I've used. But you'll each have somebody that you use that you rely on. But even in that case, send 3 foundation companies out, 3 different reports. And the range of what they think needs to be done from all the way up, it's fine, it was built this way, it was always on this slant from day one. Oh, it hadn't moved, there's any problem there. I say, oh, it sounds like having 13 piers. So you're gonna have some significant differences, but your seller's gonna have a report and information he's gonna have disclosed. If he's got 3 foundation company reports and a structural engineer report, he doesn't get to pick and choose, they all have to be disclosed. And so the seller needs to understand, and the buyer needs to, the seller especially, when they have anything done like that, they now have new disclosure requirements. They've got to do it.
Before the transaction, or after the transaction.
But sometimes the seller will do this before transaction. Yeah, I see a smile. But you know, it's a real challenge as you go through the process. So, thank you, sir, for being here. You have to go pop some popcorn.
I gotta go home. But
Oh, well, hope it's gonna be okay.
thanks.
Thank you, Tommy. Appreciate it. So as you go through and deal with the referral, it's really important. Just like foundation, same thing with roofers. Huge range of opinions from roofers. Many roofers are looking for a job, like a foundation company. Many other roofers are really good roofers. And they'll come out. Some roofers, if the seller is the one, the owner of the property is the one who calls for it, then they're gonna charge it. Higher, they may charge. So you need to know about that upfront, know what their policies are. Some roofers will do the work and be paid at closing. But if it's a lender required repair, that may be something that can be done. The lender said, well, it's gotta be done before we close this deal, before we fund it, but it can be paid at closing. Yes, sir.
So if you have, if you have the seller and you have someone looking at the house, and like this house, and the structural, I mean, the foundation engineer comes out and look at it and they say they need piers in it and stuff. The seller, after they are aware of that, they have to amend their seller's disclosure. If the deal falls through and they put it back on the market, it has to be put in the seller's disclosure, correct?
Okay, so let's talk about the information you have. If it's a written report, yeah. If you've got a written report, yes. If you have a conversation, many times you'll have a foundation company come out and you won't get anything, nothing in writing. They'll have a conversation, walk around and give you an opinion. Well, that may not rise to the disclosure, to the level of disclosure. Now, your seller should always look at that and decide if he thinks it really is a problem or not. Because we know how small the world is. And if you don't have that disclosure, the buyer shows up and then finds out later that the seller knew about it and didn't disclose it, you got a problem. But if you got a written report, they're gonna have to deal with it, disclose it. Now, if you're in a transaction and a buyer has a foundation company come out and the buyer has a report and he sends that report to the seller. Seller has something that he's gonna have disclosed to the next buyer. Not this buyer. He doesn't have to change his seller disclosure for this buyer because this buyer already has that information. If the deal falls through and this buyer goes away and the seller has that inspection report from foundation company or the track inspector, and now have information, they better update their seller disclosure. And the way I generally prefer to do that is in the seller disclosure, see attached inspection report. And attach the inspection report to that seller disclosure. You can do that using the track 1-page update sales disclosure form. Work through that. You need to be careful though. Sometimes you'll have a buyer's agent talk to you, the listing agent, say, oh, and they send over a repair request. They got all these things in there and they say, oh yeah, you got to take care of this and this and this. And a buyer's agent will also say, you know what, you might as well take care of it for us because you have to take care of it for anybody anyway. And you say, well, like a roof, well, you know, you got a roof problem. We don't actually have a roofer out there, but the inspector said, roof doesn't look good, it's old. So, you know, we want a new roof. The good listing agent would say, not a problem. We priced the house knowing it was a 20-year-old roof. If you want a new roof, it's a different price. Now, buyer's agent telling me, the listing agent, you got some real problems here. does not rise to the level of disclosure. You're still going to communicate that to your sellers, and sellers say, well, that's a problem, not a problem. But they're just trying to negotiate a deal. That's something in my mind that has not risen to the level that you have to disclose to the next buyer. Who's got a buyer's agent trying to negotiate a good deal. If you have reports from inspectors, reports from contractors, people like that, that's now something the seller has got to deal with and has got to work through. Is Marcia online?
She was earlier, yeah, she's on there.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, Marcia, he just came in. He's incredibly late. He's incredibly late. But
Did he
at
bring me
least he
water?
hasn't asked a lot of questions so far. So we'll be able to kind of help you keep track of this.
Did he at least bring you water?
No,
He did not bring me any water. And I was sitting there thinking, well, if I just had some water, everything would be okay. On your day off, you're not working, Marcia.
Oh, yeah.
I don't get nearly as much water. So on the referral, we understand what we got to do there. Our language is so important. As we work through it, it's just they cannot walk away feeling like we've told them who you have to use. They've got to understand over and over again, our job is to provide information for them to make decisions. And we'll see on the next page, we talk about the big picture. What we're giving them is relevant information, which is very tricky. It's a little bit of a challenge. So look at the one where we talk about the agent's language in fulfilling their fiduciary duties. And remember, who do we owe fiduciary duties to? Clients, and clients only. Honesty to everybody else in the transaction. Fiduciary duties only to clients. They're significant. In Craig's Canons of Ethics, they have a whole section dealing with fiduciary duties that we've got to make sure that we're on top of. And as we go through the process, and Trek is going through this right now, it'll be interesting to see at their next meeting, which is next Monday, how much of what we propose to them they're going to end up dealing with. But I want us to make sure you've got a good sense of your big picture. Hopefully, you've got a good sense of your client, buyer or seller. You know what's relevant to them. You need to recognize that even though they are the decision maker, you are making decisions for them every day. By what you tell them and by what you don't tell them. You've determined it's not relevant. And hopefully you're right. They will never sit still long enough for you to tell them everything. Just can't do it. But they need to hear everything that's relevant. And then one of our constant challenges, we do end up with a Trek issue or even a lawsuit. The phrase that really hits us, say, well, I didn't know. I just trusted my agent to tell us what we needed to know. I didn't know. And so what they're saying is our agent made a decision by not telling us something. And so we didn't have the information to make a good decision. We said, no, we trusted our agent. And judges don't like that. So, yeah, got an agent here that didn't do what, same thing with Trek. Trek pulled the negligent duty thing, just like a heartbeat. So when we go through the process, you've got that big picture, which is not only about your client, but about the market, about what you know about the other side. If you've got the buyer, you'll know what the financing picture is. You'll know about all those types of things. You'll understand, for example, if you get the buyer when they do a Trek inspection, you'll understand the limitations of a Trek inspection. We've had cases over the years where there were some areas that were not inspected. The buyer never really read the inspector saying did not have access to that particular area. And so because he did not have access to that particular area, he couldn't comment. He couldn't make an inspection. And the buyer thought, well, he inspected everything. There's some things they don't inspect. They don't address the property code. They don't address here's certain things that have to be done. You've got to update whatever. They don't address those types of things. Most Trek inspectors aren't going to go on the roof. Some of them do work through that. What have I done now? I can just, as soon as came in, I'm in trouble. Bob, you should have done this. You didn't do it. How many times do I have to explain this to you?
Whoever did this, thank you. You're welcome.
Ah, good. Great job.
What a thing to do.
Thank you, Janet. As you go through the process, you understand as you're working through that, what the buyer needs to consider, what you need to work through the process and decide on what's relevant as you go through that. Oh, okay, so good, that's okay. If you've got the seller and you're helping advise the seller is looking at an offer or looking at a repair request, you need to provide them good information so that they can make decisions about what they're gonna do there. Could be a real challenge. Got material? Did you download? Or are you going to go back here? Well, grab some material. I'm on the page, age and language. Thank you for being in here. You need to advise the client without telling them what to do. And I understand that's a balancing act, but it's important. Okay, advise them, provide them all the relevant information they need, make a decision. When a seller is looking at a buyer's repair request, they came to them on the 10th day of a 10-day option period. And they're already hacked. What's going on here? They inspected the property 7 days ago. How come it's on the left? They're playing games here, aren't they? I mean, we know what they're trying to do. They're trying to pressure us into doing this or they're going to terminate the contract. And that's just not right. You've got to help your seller pull back from the emotional reaction, deal with that. Look at what it is, help them consider what's being requested, how it may impact. You'll understand whether or not there's a lot of other risks in the property. Maybe you even have a backup contract sitting there. You've got to help the seller understand all that as they're considering this and pull back. There can be all kinds of legitimate reasons why this didn't happen until the 10th day. It could be that there was not anything malicious, anything sneaky, whatever going on. That's just how that was. But you need to help them do that. Without telling them, here's what you've got to accept, not accept. You also need to help them understand, as long as the buyer, they help the buyer understand, they don't have to get this done by the end of the option period. They can continue to negotiate all the way to closing. Buyer loses an important leverage as you go past the option. And the seller has the risk that if they don't work something out by 5 p.m. on that last day, this buyer could terminate. They could totally lose the buyer. Well, that may not be a big deal. And it may be that the option period is not all that important because it's in manual HOA and they don't have the information yet. So the buyer's got that right of termination anyway. So, we don't have that same timeline of pressure that we do, but that's going to be your understanding of this is how that works. And this is what you do. And you advise your client with the good relevant information without doing what? Without telling them, here's what you have to do. Without telling them, hey, here's the deal. You've got to do this. With buyers, when you go through an inspection report with a buyer, and hopefully it's a good inspector who at the end of the inspection has sat down with the buyer and given them their summary and talked about all the things. Here are the things that are really functional. Here are the things that are cosmetic. Here are the things you really need to be concerned with. So when you sit down with your buyer and help him work up that list of requests for repairs, use the buyer's aid, have the big picture. How's this going to impact? How's this going to negotiate? How are we going to work through this as you deal with it? And your buyer may have, say, I got these 10 items. You say, okay, let's prioritize those items. It's a good idea. It's a good strategy to prioritize them. So maybe you got a seller who said, well, based on the price of this and all that kind of stuff, we'll do the first 5, but the rest of it, that's kind of fiddly stuff and you have to handle that on your own. But because you prioritize it, you put yourself in a good position as your buyer maybe will negotiate the most important things. You also need to know enough about your buyer that there's some things in there that have shown up in the inspection report that may appear to be a big deal, but they're not. The buyer says, we don't care about that. We're gutting that whole part of the house anyway. We're going to do serious remodeling, so we don't care about any of that. We're going to put in a new tub, new commodes, new flooring, so that's okay. Now, it doesn't mean you won't try to negotiate because those are big items. Those are things that without lying, without being deceitful, you may negotiate with the seller and say, well, wow. I was a little surprised at the condition of those floors that you came up with. You're not going to say, that's not a big deal. My buyer is going to put all that anyway. You're not going to tell them that. That's going to impact on your buyer's negotiating position, but you're not going to lie about it either. You should work through it and do it. But you're going to help your buyer understand. Your buyer may say, you know what? Don't worry about the HVAC. It's not a lender required repair. Because they don't have that information anyway, and most of the time you don't have. Correct. You don't get a copy of the inspection report most of the time, do you?
No, some people submit to us, if it's something super big, then yes, I have a lot of people just sympathize with that, or some people send it anyway.
As a general rule, don't send the inspection report to the lender.
Yeah, thankfully, I'm not even gonna comment any further, because, yeah.
But as you go through that, your buyer may own the HVAC company. He said, don't worry about the temperature differentials. We're gonna do this and we'll do it better and cheaper than anything we're gonna ask the seller to do. So, but now if you agree to do that, you're still gonna say to the seller says, you know what? This showed up the inspection, temperature differentials, there are some serious issues here, may even be a leak in Freon, whatever. But so, well, we're not gonna ask you for this, so let's do a trade-off. We don't want this, but how about, can we do something over here? You're a little bit negotiating trade-off, and you kind of work through that. You're gonna help your buyer to think about those things. Yes, sir.
Yeah, even though y'all don't send out the concession, one thing that I ask all my agents to do is show this for your lenders, so they're ahead of the game, is the second that you do get the inspection and you know that you're gonna be requesting for seller concessions, just reach out to your lender, hey, we got the inspection back, gonna be asking for some seller concessions, because that can prep them with underwriting and closing on stuff, knowing that, hey,
Yeah.
we should be expecting something in that 12AB category.
Yeah. Now, to the point of this, when you're negotiating these things, and you do sell a concession, for example, I suppose, make sure this repair amendment, make sure the lender gets a copy of it. You don't get to pick and choose amendments to the contract. Every amendment of the contract goes to everyone.
I have a question for Colin.
Okay?
If you're doing a seller concession, would you rather just see price reduction versus a seller concession?
I don't like to care what I like. I'd say I'd like to really break it down to the consumer and give him both options, him or her.
I'm asking you what do you?
What do I like?
Isn't that very specific to a transaction?
Yeah,
Because it can really make a difference in the down payment and the financing.
it could, I'd say a seller concession is probably the easiest. They literally just go to the bottom line, pick it off. And most of the time the client goes, oh, I don't have to bring that much anymore. Okay, sweet. I'd say that's probably a lot more of an impact, especially when it comes to cash flows versus a smaller monthly payment.
Now, remember, if you can do a trade-off on the sales price for the seller, every dollar less in the sales price is a dollar out of their pocket. It's not a dollar out of the buyer's pocket, who's financing. Everybody understand that? Every drop in the sales price affects the seller directly, doesn't affect the buyer directly. You've got financing. So you can do a trade-off for $1,000 or a couple $1,000 in reduction and in the deal. That doesn't impact on you as the buyer side that much, but impacts on the seller. A good listing agent can help your seller understand, okay, here's the difference between how this impacts on the buyer and impacts on you. So if you're going to give up that money out of your pocket, here's what you need to be prepared to do. Could it be something different for each side? It works. So that big picture, all those types of things you start, and this is endless, by the way. But you'll learn in every transaction, you'll add a little bit more in every transaction to your big picture. Because when you're talking to your client, your big picture understanding of everything in this transaction is going to put you in a better position, provide them with good information. In many cases, things that they say, wow, we hadn't thought about that. And every little one of those builds more confidence in them about you. Which means you're more likely to take some of your good advice as you work through it. They're going to trust you more as you deal with that. Now, another part of the big picture, and you see this in my form there, Doc, is dealing with competencies. Geographic competency, subject matter competency, and then we'll find ourselves also talking about planting, which is what we've been talking about. We've talked about this a little bit before in other classes. Trek continues down this road, more and more of an emphasis. Geographic competency is a very, very tricky situation. Thank you all. Appreciate you being here.
Appreciate you, Bob.
The concept is what Trek how they enforce the concept is what a client would expect an agent to know to represent them in a particular market area. So if you're gonna work with the property with a buyer, it's, Mansfield. You better know something about Mansfield, more than just what you pull up in MLS. Or what a buyer expects you to know, as you work through that. Geographic competency is a challenge in our market today. Because we do have agents in Plano with listings in Mansfield. Southwest Arlington. Northwest Fort Worth. And one in Weatherford. All these are in our MLS. But geographic competency is way more than what's in MLS. It's knowing what's going on in those areas. Understanding, for example, when you look up in the area around South Lake, Flower Mound up in there, the value of a property changes dramatically, whether it's in the flight plan or not. And the flight patterns change. But when you go from one street over to another major street, you have a different price range. Local agents would know that. You don't have that in MLS. You work through it. So TREC is going to hold you to that geographic competency. What you've got to do is make sure you have the conversation. If you're doing an area for the first time and you don't have a lot of familiarity, but the reason your client is wanting you to work with them in an area is because of the relationship, either past business you've done or whatever relationship is going there. You need to make sure they understand your level of experience with that area. For example, schools, a number of areas, and you've seen this in Garland, seen this in the area. Schools are closing. So people will not, their kids won't go to that close elementary school. That school is closing next year, they go to another one. A local agent would know that. Doesn't show up in MLS. Oh, we got that great little disclaimer. Make sure you check it out. Make sure you buyer, all that kind of stuff. Which is, I will say, it's a pretty silly question.
So listing side and buying side, would you say that you would use the buyer side than because
No, both equal.
they both
Absolutely equal. You're gonna price your property on the listing side. It's gonna be based on what's going on in that area, in that market.
okay.
So yeah, good question. Could be both sides. The ones that the sellers complaint against you is going to be, he ended up selling it for less than he should have. You would have gotten more if you knew what was going on in the area. Your buyer's complaint is going to be, what, I paid too much, or I bought the wrong property, or I didn't know that just, 2 blocks over, there were much better subdivision, much better properties, better prices and everything. They're going to have their challenges. When this geographic competency came out from TREC, and it was actually 3 years ago, it first showed up as a TREC rule in 535.2 in broker responsibility section. Even though they recognize this is going to be something that's hard to enforce, and it is because there's so many layers, so subjective. TREC did and is continuing to push the geographic competency. As TREC is moving into, thanks, Janet, moving into this new, more extensive role of encouraging people to file complaints, as they are. We need to make sure that we're dealing with that. So geographic competency, be honest about your experience in an area that your client wants you to work in, and be very quick to say, you know what? Really don't know, but I think I'll find a good agent and I'll refer them out. And that's the best service to your client as you work through that.
Finding an agent and referring them out is the best, and what about not getting educated on it, or is it just impossible?
If it's one of those things, if it's close enough and you feel like you can, based on the timing of what your buyer needs to do or your seller needs to do, you could do that and make sure your client understands, I'm newly learning about this. Okay. It's a new process. Yesterday, I didn't even know if there was a Dairy Queen in Mansfield. I now have been down there and there's a Dairy Queen, so I'm in a much better knowledge level here, so. It's important, they're important things like that you need to be.
So if you CYA on yourself on letting them know that I'm new to the area, I will have to learn, do some research on this area. Is that enough to qualify you to?
That's not qualified. It helps mitigate your trouble with traffic.
Reliability.
What you want is an acknowledgement that here's what you disclosed to them. And they chose because of the relationship. You know what? We trust you. We don't want to break in a new agent. Thanks for letting us know your limitations. We'll learn about Mansfield together. And we'll go through that process and we'll do it. That'll help you, because if they're gonna file a track complaint, Trick says, well, it's what you said. Did you lie to the agent about that, or did you forget about it, or did you change your mind, or whatever? It'll help you. It won't be a total lie, but it'll help as you work through the process. But geographic competency is really good. We don't have as big a challenge in our market area, but in the finest level, geographic competency can be stretched to Gunter, Anna, Van Alstine. Those are different markets, but they're all in our MLS. It's really easy to get all the information. Sometimes as simple as you're sitting here in Plano and deal with properties in Richardson. That's our backyard, yeah, but is there a difference in East Richardson and West Richardson and how that market is? Like, yeah, sure, absolutely. In the good old days where you couldn't get people from West Richardson to even show East Richardson, same thing in Plano. So there are a lot of things that we go through the process. Yeah, subject matter, yes, sir, question.
So with that said, is like, do you foresee like a track like moving to where they're trying? I'm just thinking of like, we keep adding, our MLS keeps adding, like, like you have like
We
Louisiana.
have Abilene,
Yeah,
we have Terrell.
like, do you see Trek coming in and just like breaking some of those big MLSs up, so we have to help force us to
No,
be, or, okay.
Trick's gonna totally rely on complaints and enforcement.
Okay.
They're gonna, in fact, the questions that the commissioners themselves have been asking each other in some of these meetings is, how big a problem is this going to be? And what we're gonna see in most cases is when agents really stretch out of what can be finally referred to as their primary market. So they probably do what?
Like when their address is Florida.
Yeah, when pressure Florida, yeah. But when they're taking on properties and they're trying to work way outside the area, Abilene's a good example. It's in our regional MLS. But when you stretch, say, well, I can handle Abilene. I got 10 MLS. So when you really go to it, but technically you could be in a problem when you're sitting in Plano and you're dealing with a buyer in the uptown area. You go from one street over to another street, it's a different world. I think you really have to struggle to be familiar with what goes on in that area to even take a listing and work a buyer. It's going to come down to the nature of what you're going to have to be able to do is convince Trek that the client really relied on the relationship and told you and understood here are the limitations, but we want to work with this agent. So you really need to make sure that's done. The commissioners themselves, the 9 commissioners, are having conversations back and forth about geographic competency, and there are going to be more adjustments as they work through it, because in real estate today, agents are expanding dramatically how far they work. It's just, we've got one of our agents in Paris is just taking over and working in Tyler too, and expanding the market to work Tyler. That's clearly a different geographic area from Paris to Tyler. But she's got some experience in Tyler. Actually used to live there years ago. So there's gonna be a lot of them. So the commission themselves are kind of taking this on a case by case basis, looking at if they see a lot of complaints come to Trek dealing with this issue, and they start pushing the enforcement button a little bit more. Subject matter competency is one of the 2 big competencies that Trek really pushes. And you've got a second page here after that, where it talks about real estate subject matter competency. And these are the different areas. Now, right now, Trek has a rule that probably will change if it gets approved this coming Monday. When an agent does the first type of transaction that's haven't done before, they're required to have coaching and assistance. We, on the Broker Responsibility Working Group, made a motion that it'd be the first 3 transactions, it's a new type. And here's some examples of different areas. It's very, very common, particularly for new agents, to start off doing leases. It's a quicker deal, can be quick money as you work through the process. But if you don't do it right, it can be very expensive to do them. You certainly don't want to take on a potential tenant who will do things all over the FW. And they're gonna rent a nice little 1,500 month house. You just can't afford that kind of expense going around all over the DFW. You want to have a nice tight market as you work through that. But you see residential sales, residential leases, almost across the board. And we're one of them. All the brokers say, well, you know, if you primarily work residential, you can do either one. They're kind of the same. Well, they're not the same. There were paperwork, there were qualifying, there were situations, there were people involved on a semi-regular basis. You know, when I get phone calls about some of these challenges, where they've gone through the process, the buyers made the application, they got a lease and things like that. There are all kinds of questions in that process. You know, which lease form do you use? Because landlord gets to control that. You work through the process or the terms. We tend to minimize leases because, well, there's really not a lot of negotiation. Here's how much you're going to lease it for. Here's the form we're going to use. You know, here's the security, here's the requirement. So write it up. And while that may be true in many, many cases, it's not 100%. And a tenant needs to understand, here's some of the rights I have. Here's what I can negotiate. Here's what I cannot negotiate as you work through that. And certainly, Cynthia, as you do property management, you see that all the time. Even within residential sales, it's a different animal when you're doing a residential sale of a $1 million plus property, of a high income property. Or you're dealing with a typical, you know, 200,000, 800,000 in Plano or Frisco or whatever. Where you do residential sales in different areas. If you're doing a residential sale, high-rise condos in the uptown area, that's a different animal. So, and even in sales, residential sales and leases, you can have some differences, but we generally allow that this is within a category that agents can fairly easily, you're sliding over. You're fairly easily get into a situation where things could happen as you work through it. Now, most of the time, the reason we don't have more complaints in the leasing area is it's a small deal, small money, and typically gets resolved, gets taken care of at some level. And I may end up with a phone call or something like that, but it tends to get resolved. So residents, we're kind of easy on that, just an experience standpoint. So the sales now, residential property management. Fortunately, if you're going to try residential property management, it's not going to be here unless you're like Cynthia, where you have a brokerage license and a separate company. You can do that there. But residential property management, residential property management is regulated by TREC, but it's fairly narrowly defined. It's essentially someone who's in control of the rent. You collect the rent, have control of the rent, and you can use that rent to pay expenses and negotiate, you know, with vendors and things like that. That's what you're going to have in a property management. But if you're with a brokerage and you're an agent of brokerage and they allow property management and you're going to try to do that, and you're doing that for the first time, and you need coaching and assistance. You're going to have it. Your broker is going to require it because all property management is at the broker level. The agent level is at the broker level to work through that. TREC does not deal with commercial property management at all. They deal with commercial leasing, but TREC does not regulate commercial property management. It's not in their wheelhouse at all. They don't deal with it at all. Farm and ranch sales, it's a different subject matter competency. Of all 6 TREC contracts, it's the most complex of all the contracts. It's a complex issue. Out of my Rockwall office, right now I have 2 potential complaints dealing with acreage, dealing with the farm and ranch issue, which the agent didn't do a really good job of making sure about water availability to the property. One, they assumed, well, there's water right across the street. All those places all have water lines and so, and it's one of those private water company kind of things. As it turns out, that didn't translate to this property across the street. And the cost is huge. And the problem is, we didn't find out about it until after closing. We had to buy it. Significant challenge in trying to work through it and deal with it. Farms and ranches can be a huge challenge. Even knowing whether to use the farm and ranch contract or the 1-to-4 family contract or the unimproved property contract. Make sure you're using the right contract form as you work through that. Unimproved property sales, unimproved property leases. What's unimproved property? What is that?
On land.
Raw land. We have a contract form for that. Now, when might we have unimproved property leases?
Agricultural leases.
Yeah, almost always agricultural. You have crop issues, things of that nature. And that takes some real specialized knowledge to be able to deal with that. Same thing, foreclosures, short sales, those special areas. They have actually a track addendum dealing with short sales. 1031 exchanges, which falls under the commercial area, like we're dealing with commercial sales. You may be very experienced in commercial sales, but you may have never dealt with a 1031 exchange. You need to make sure you're clear of that. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted you to emphasize that the 1031 exchange has to be done by a third party fiduciary, and you have to make that decision before you go in. Newbie me didn't realize that I could help my buyer make that decision, seller make that decision at the closing table. It's too late at that point. You'll have to delay the closing.
Yeah, so that brings up, there are a lot of requirements to deal with 1031, including the time limits for the seller to be able to work through that. I just had some water. And work through that, so there's some time limit requirements, you have a certain amount of time to do that. Can be very beneficial. There are certain limitations. Single family home, if it's your homestead, doesn't qualify, it's got to be investment properties. So there are all kinds of things in deal with 1031 exchange. If you're a normal residential agent dealing with sales and you have an investor, buyer, or seller says, yeah, I want to do a 1031 on this. You need to make sure you've got someone who understands them, has some experience in them to help you with it. And there's a lot of good information out there available, including there's a section in the IRS rules, actually 1031. That's why they call it 1031 exchange, because it's in that section as they deal with it. So you need to do that. Just like you need to deal with FERPTA. And we've had classes where we have to have FERPTA. In fact, I had Adam. Thank you so very much. Voice one, appreciate it. Even lubricated. Yeah. Thank you, but water. So, you know, dealing with pork sellers, things like that, just really. The big issue there is the title company. It's going to help you or not help you, whatever. We have a new thing coming up. In fact, it's going through the legislature right now. And deals with foreign investments, foreign purchase of land. In fact, one of the bills going through the Texas legislature right now deals not just with land, but just real estate, where they're wanting to limit investors from certain countries the purchase of land or purchase of real estate. The degree to which those get passed to the form they finally get passed in, we don't know. But there's some concerns in that area where they don't want a foreign investor from certain countries to go buy a nice big tract of land right next to a military installation. And I can see a certain logic in that. We kind of focused in the past on the tax situation with foreign sellers, and now we're looking at situation with foreign buyers. Although, hello, James Dean. There's paperwork in the back there. They're dealing with foreign sellers and foreign buyers as you work with the situation. Your area of expertise is probably limited in both of those as the new laws come across, the new laws change. We have to be able to do that and advise our clients properly, work through that. Just, we don't know the final format. We actually received this office. And we're having our government affairs director, CCAR, talk to Texas Realtor. They're having their big midwinter meeting this weekend, so maybe you'll find out something then. We received from the U.S. Department of Agriculture about a 3-page document that was primarily addressed to buyers who were buying more than 10 acres of land. If they were a foreign buyer, they had to disclose certain things. And nothing in that form requires anything of the agent. We don't know if one of those bills that are going through the legislature now is going to address our obligation. We don't know to what degree that's going to impact on us as you work through that. So there are a lot of things going down the pike because we've always held that anyone from anywhere can buy real estate in the US. That's just kind of been the thing, but evidently just in politics have gotten in the middle of this and maybe we don't. Okay, Janet, and then.
So I did call a representative on that and just threw in a suggestion that if it's not the land, at least consider the mineral rights. Because I heard of a group buying a large plot of land in
See, that makes sense.
West South Texas and then drilling the oil and shipping it off to another country. And I was like,
Yeah.
"Well,
Yeah.
that's different."
So that could be, getting mineral rights. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Then for foreign investor, whether to have training or something for especially for the foreign.
Buyer, seller,
For buyers.
okay. It's a good question. We probably need to address that, maybe have one of our good title company attorneys come and talk to us about some of the things as you have buyers. To me, if it's a foreign buyer, the big thing is going to be the money, the financing,
Yes.
making sure that they're able to obtain the financing to buy.
If they're cash buyers are.
Okay, so if there's cash buyers, you're going to be able to identify the source of funds.
Yes.
So they've got funds here. And there are not any special challenges right now until some of the bills pass. But the limitations on foreign buyers.
If they don't have anything here, they're foreign investor. How
They're
does
what?
that- Foreign investor, they want to buy a property or a house, like rental. But how do they, what is the law?
Well, there's no law right now. So right now, there's no law. But the Texas legislature is looking at least 2 bills that may pass that will restrict people from certain specific countries and being able to buy real estate in the US. One just deals with real estate across the board, the other primarily deals with land. So we got,
And that, this.
so we won't know for sure until early June at the end of the legislature, what passed or not. And Texas Realtors will keep us up. That's on their radar and they're lobbying, they're working through that. So we'll see what ends up happening there.
Now I'm talking about Canada, it's from Canada and then.
Well, saying Canada's a foreign country.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about Canada,
Yes.
even though we kind of view Canada as a friendly ally, they've got severe restrictions on us buying property in Canada. And so we've got some legislatures who are looking at that and want to say right now it's China and a couple other countries like that. So well, maybe we should include Canada. Look at all their restrictions on us. So that could happen. We tend to think of, foreign countries as sweat, but we got Mexico, we got Canada. We got Oklahoma, a lot of foreign areas that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, this is Laura. I have a question. How is that?
Here's the problem. Okay, wait, question, Zoomer question?
Yes, sir. It's Laura.
Okay, go ahead.
I have a question. How is that gonna affect the federal regs of the protected class national origin? Is it?
Yeah, it could be a protected class issue. It could be, but we went through last year and we're going through this year, travel restrictions on people from certain countries. So we've got a lot of fair housing issues or discrimination issue dealing with protected classes, and that certainly could be an issue that you're gonna have to work through. And particularly as they identify certain specific, it becomes a very hot political issue. And they're gonna be, politicians who just don't want to go down that road of really targeting certain groups. Because that could be a real, federal policy issue. Because this is something happening here on a state level. We're not the only state looking at this. Congress is also looking at this. I think, as far as I know, they don't have any bill proposed that they're moving through the ranks there. But this is gonna be a hot issue. More and more people want to get on board with saying, you know, to protect our integrity, our country and all that kind of stuff, we're gonna have to be careful who we let by. I mean, would you like somebody from Oklahoma living next door? I don't think so. You know,
So
you gotta
stay
have
tuned.
some restriction. Do what?
Stay tuned.
So yeah, because it really is work. It's gonna be really interesting to see if the bill passes our Texas legislature and in what final form it's gonna end up. And it may not be. My real concern is, are we gonna have casinos or not? See, I want a casino. I think we just need to have some more. Stop sending this money to Louisiana and Oklahoma and other places. Let's have a good casino. Let's have it here in Dallas. Or maybe Plano. And look, Frisco's getting all this stuff. Plano needs a good casino.
Plano needs something.
Town, I have a.
Are you gonna open your own casino, Bob?
Huh?
Are you gonna open your own casino?
No, I just want to go play poker. I want to go to the poker. Good clean room. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
What is the foreclosure?
Pardon me?
What is the foreclosure?
Okay. In dealing with the foreclosure, there are two areas. We look at buyer and seller. So if you're gonna take a listing and the seller said, I've already been posted as for a foreclosure, which is gonna create some challenges with contract. You have to talk to the lender to see whether or not you can move into a short sale issue. Or talk to the lender and say, okay, if we get a contract before the first Tuesday of the next month, will you honor that or are you gonna foreclose anyway? So you need to know who's involved in foreclosure. On the buyer side, hopefully, if this property has been posted, or is about to be posted and it's expenses already, your buyer knows, because your buyer doesn't need to expend time, energy and money when there's gonna be someone else, such as the lender, in control of what happens.
This is not pretty clear. It's not a house that has been foreclosed on.
No, so it's something that's in process. Yeah, as opposed to that. Yeah, good point. And commercial sales and leases, I mean, it's a pretty clear category. You've got to have expertise if any of those subject matters. Those are important kinds of things as you deal with it. The big thing in this whole situation, and deal with the big picture and deal with your language. Try to avoid using language that causes them to think you're making decisions, you're in control. Because although you do make some decisions, it has to be decisions that you personally think that was the right thing to do. It was relevant to my client or was not relevant. You're constantly making those decisions about, here's what I know it's important to my client. Here's what I do. Here's what I have to say. Here's what I have to tell them. Here's what I don't. This gets to, for example, in dealing with the builders. Builders are the riskiest transaction. This gets to our last page, direct versus non-direct documents. We've got some significant obligations dealing with advising our client on track versus non-track. Clearly, we need to be familiar with the 6 track contract forms and the 42 addenda that are available for the different transactions. And when they're properly used, of course, you'll clearly know by now the correct contract form that you need to be using after February 1st, which was last Wednesday. Not just last week. As you'll be able to go through and deal with that. Non-track documents that we deal with all the time. First of all, most builder contracts, not all, some builders will use the track forms. Not very many of them. So you got 2 track promulgated forms deal with the new homes. Most builders have their own contract form. That's probably either the riskiest or among the riskiest transaction which we represent buyers. Because we're trusting the builder to do what they say they're going to do. It's not a track form. We still need to, based on how we understand a transaction is done, we still can go through that contract form, which sometimes it's a few pages, sometimes it's 20 or 30 pages, depending on the builder. And we need to look at some of the basics, like you need to have correct names in there, you need to have prices, you need to address financing. There's some issues in there, But you can't go through all the documents, some of the paragraphs which are totally written by the builder's attorneys and start interpreting those and advise your client. It's not a Trek form. And some of the builder contracts are gosh awful. They're so builder focused. James?
As a case in point, I had a builder recently that marked. They're using the Texas Association of Builders form,
Yeah,
knowing my client had to have financing, but they chose to accept no financing required box. And they were very reluctant to change it because their opinion was, we don't care where you get the money, as long as you come to closing, it doesn't matter to us.
but it does because
But it
financing is
eliminates-
contingency.
It eliminates all those contingencies.
Yep.
We had to push to make sure it was clear that financing was required and buyers really wanted to have that box marked, but
Yep.
that was not the default position.
So you need to, you really need to advise your buyer. You read this document, read it carefully. If you have any questions, you need to talk to an attorney who understands builder contracts. Some of the builder contracts are so gosh awful. I mean, basically they say, you know, if on the closing day, we still feel like it, we might sell you the house. We might not. We may have somebody else we'd rather sell to because they're gonna pay more. And it almost is that bad of language. So we have to be very, when you need to help our buyer understand the risk of new home transactions and deal with builders. Certainly, if it's not any of the builders that we know about, the big builders that even them are private, but some of the smaller builders, we're really relying on that smaller builder to still be in business and be able to perform and get things done, because all the builders having trouble with getting good personnel, skilled persons. Yes,
I
sir.
think I'd like to just continue this one comment I made earlier, and that is, my clients did choose to hire an attorney. And they were spending $400 to $600 for review, and they were reluctant to spend the money, but when you're looking at the significant investment, they were looking
Yeah, what
at
was the price of the house?
over $1 million.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was wise to have an attorney.
Well,
Did he get good advice from the attorney?
I wasn't involved in the conversation between them. I think they were happy and pleased with the outcome.
Okay, good. Where did they get the name of an attorney?
For someone you may know intimately, such as yourself. And I think I may,
Mark Davis should have been one of them. He's a construction
I'm not sure
specialist.
who they ended up using, but I think, yeah, that was some referrals you had made, and I think one other, maybe Charles Kramer may have given me some names.
Yeah. Okay. But it is one of the riskiest transactions we do because we're really trusting, more than a normal seller situation, we're really trusting them to do what they're saying, live up to their marketing words, as I mentioned earlier. HOA subdivision information. Some of those are 60 pages. You know, you need to tell your buyer, you know what, you need to look through it. Your buyer needs to put some good information in paragraph 6D, objections about things they want to do. That creates some rights of objections in a certain time frames. But as they work through all that, they need to see what they can and cannot do, especially if they've got, they want to buy it as an investment property, they want to do certain things. They need to really understand what the HOA, and your buyer needs to be the one that talks to the HOA. Here's what we're going to buy this property. We know what it is. Now, if you've got the seller, and your seller needs to talk to the HOA and find out what their real numbers are, what their costs are. Because in paragraph C of the HOA addendum, that establishes a buyer's cost, everything else is the seller. As you work through that. So, you know, you need to make sure your client has paid attention to what's going on there. Part of the subdivision information is a resale certificate. That's actually a Trek document. So you can read through that, and some of the good information you'll find there will deal with things like any current violations, any lawsuits going on other than lawsuits against an individual, property taxes, or whatever like that. Any liens, what are the current assessments? So you can go through and make sure they read through all that and they look at all the things in the resale certificate, you work through that. Title commitments. You need to be familiar with the 4 sections of a title commitment. The 4 A, B, C, and D. A is important. You're not practicing law or interpreting things, but A is important because it tells you the important information about the property. Who's the seller? What's the legal description? You know, who actually owns it? Who has the right to convey title? That's section A. So you would look at that and make sure who you have in the contract is who shows up in section 8. Because the concept of the title commitment is the title company is saying, here's the information, and they're saying this really more in Schedule C. And we're making you an offer of, we're going to issue a title insurance policy under certain conditions. And here's the seller, here's the person to pay title. Section B will talk about some other things, and liens, whatever on the property. But Schedule C is the important one because it says, here are the conditions, here are the exclusions, here are the exceptions. Here are the conditions under which we'll issue. You need to look at that because something that often pops up is you say, oh, it's $100,000 IRS lien. We didn't see that information in seller disclosure notice because that's one of the things the seller would have to disclose as you work through that. So you want to make sure you look for any big red flags, say to your buyer says, okay, here's some issues. You need to talk to the title company who issued this title commitment and say, what is this? What's going on here? Because the title company is saying these things have to be resolved before we'll close the transaction.
So what do you
List those out.
with the IRS lien? Can that be paid at closing or do you need to?
Well, you need to find out. And seller may have already been working on that, have already got that semi-resolved, or they say, wow, didn't know about that. Gee, that's a surprise. But that's a red flag. That's, I mean, we've got to find out what's going on. We don't want to find ourselves at closing saying, well, I mean, I still have enough equity here to pay that. So we're going to work something out or whatever. Yeah, these are things that are going to be tags. You say, wow, work on that. Because clearly we won't, that's, you know, title company is going to say, hey, has to be resolved. In paragraph 9, you've got where out of the, ain't have any liens or like that. It's not satisfied out of the sales proceeds. So you understand that's how the contract has to work as you work through that. But you need to understand what's in that title commitment. Yes, ma'am.
One where it was laying in fixture home on it too, and title found some liens on the tax liens. The statute of limitation had expired, so then it went through underwriting.
So if a title company approves that and doesn't make an exception for that, and your agent, I mean, your buyer is protected.
I have the listings.
Oh, okay. Well, then it was able to close. Because they say it was, yeah. That's good. See, to me, that's a good title company that'll make a good business decision. Find out this information, say to seller, you know, we're able to go ahead and issue a title policy to get this thing done. Even though there may be some risk. Say, oh, because the title company just made a legal opinion with their underwriters, saying we feel like this is expired, it's no longer enforceable, expired like 20 years ago.
Yes, like 20 years ago, the person was 70 something, and this was. It's changed.
Yeah. Question? Yes.
On going back to the property management and Trek and all that, where does Trek define like a multifamily building from residential to commercial?
Anything over 4 units, Trek's not involved.
Who is involved?
No one. Property code, the law. There's no requirement for a seller disclosure notice on, actually, the seller disclosure notice is only for a single unit residential. So if you're selling a duplex, the whole duplex, section 5.008 doesn't apply. Trek, we know goes 4 units because we have the 1 to 4 family contract. Anything above that becomes commercial, and Trek doesn't regulate. You have common law, you have property code issues. Of course, you have Texas Realtor contract forms to use, but nothing from Trek. Trek only gets involved if a client, for example, says, well, my agent didn't explain to me that this, and then files a claim with Trek, and then Trek would have to look at it and see if you were negligent because you didn't help your client understand a 16-unit apartment complex is different than a single-family home.
Right. So
Trek doesn't even have a form for those.
So if I want to go like be a commercial property manager, you're telling me that there is no Trek or anything saying you need to have some competency in this?
Okay, so you're saying you want to be a commercial property manager?
Theoretically.
Okay, but you're gonna help me feel better that you're not gonna do that.
You created questions and I'm just trying to understand.
Okay, and I appreciate it.
No, I don't have any real.
Trek will not be involved in enforcing anything dealing with the commercial property management. It's not in their statute. They will address commercial leasing, but not property management. Anytime you've got something more, if someone files a complaint with TREC, first thing they look at is whether or not they have any jurisdiction. And on commercial property management, they don't have. They'll say to the, whoever it is filing complaints, that, you know, you need to talk to an attorney, a private attorney on your own to pursue this. Because TREC said, we won't handle a complaint. You'd have to show some significant violation of public trust to be able to move forward and have any action, because TREC doesn't regulate commercial.
Why not?
They made a decision, so the question is, why not? This decision was made back way long ago, back in the 40s, even before I got into real estate. That it was primarily an agency dealing with protecting the public in residential property residential transactions. That's their only area. It's too complex, there's too many other issues. They focus on residential almost from the beginning, and that's still where they are.
Wow, that kind of
And
explains
in
a
order
lot.
to change that, it's going to take an act of the legislature.
Okay,
And I will tell you right now, the legislature, that's not on their radar at all. And they're not in favor of that on any level. So that won't happen.
thanks, Bob.
A good question, and giving me a little bit of a beat in my heart here, that, oh my God, an agent is gonna do some commercial property management. Oh my God, what are we gonna do now? Okay.
We can do that, right? And
Yeah, and practice law too. You see, you get to make up a law school that you graduated from, and then right after you show people on that, you run for Congress.
okay.
Okay, so last thing, seller disclosure notice. Technically, a seller disclosure notice is not a TREC document. It's a property code document. The broker lawyer committee doesn't even address issues in the seller disclosure notice because that's a statute issue, section 5.008. What you've got to do as a listing agent, when you receive the seller disclosure notice from your seller, you need to take a look at it from a completion standpoint. And if anything, your seller has already told you, he's given what appears to be the wrong answer. You and the seller may have had a conversation about the foundation work he had done a couple of years ago and got a transfer of warranty and everything's good. But the seller disclosure notice where it asked about, are you aware of? He said, no. He said, let's talk about the no. Well, we fixed it. It's not a defect. It's okay. It's good. We got it resolved. In fact, we got a transfer warranty. So that's a no. That's not what the question asked, and it's not a no, it's a yes. And somehow you've got to have the conversation without your seller thinking what?
Not looking out for them. But you work with the other party.
What? It's not looking out for them. It's them thinking you just told them how to fill out a seller disclosure notice. They cannot walk away from the conversation thinking you've told them how to complete it. Because then you're in big trouble. So you've got to walk away from the conversation. Okay, let's look at that question again and let's look at what it actually is asking. And then you decide on your own, totally without my help, you decide how you want to answer it. So you got to look at that. Same thing as a buyer's agent. When you get the seller disclosure notice from a listing agent, you need to look at it for completeness. And you say, okay, it's, you're not going to generally be able to look at it as correctness. Both the seller and the buyer need to understand that in the lawsuit arena, this is a big source of complications of lawsuits after closing when buyers sue the seller. And the buyer needs to understand they can make the seller be held accountable for what they say. And the seller needs to understand that. The seller needs to take some time to complete this using the seller shield. You get the little video in there that help them fill it out. They need to understand that they need to make sure it's correct, it's complete, it's accurate, because the buyer can rely on this, can hold the seller accountable. So the seller needs to take it seriously. Give them the time to do it. Sometimes we'll walk through the house. What do you want to exclude? Is it, by the way, while I'm over here, we're doing paperwork, why don't you fill that seller disclosure out real quick? Give them time. Let them work through it. I'll make sure it's done right. Yes, ma'am.
Question, like, if we have a conversation and we said, the thing that you said, the move has fix it, and when we said like, put it on, and he still didn't correct that, what do I do?
Okay, so it happened. You'll have sellers say, no, that's Bob, you're wrong. That's not the right answer. Here's the right answer. And if it's a good listing and you still want to take it and you're not concerned with what other things he's hiding, still want to do it, you're going to have him acknowledge an email saying, okay, we've had this conversation. Here's what you've chosen to do. It's my opinion that this could be a problem with the buyer. And you just get him to acknowledge that. You're not going to tell him what to do. Because then he's going to say, well, I filled it out based on what my agent told me to do. Don't you? And it's hard because, sometimes, well, most of the time it's because you haven't had the conversation you don't know about it until way after the fact. And then it's a problem. Because one of the things that we do know, not in a tract complaint, but in a lawsuit, when the seller gets sued, so do we. They're going to automatically include the deep pockets. That's us. Zoomers, any questions following up? Because we're about through. In fact, we're 5 minutes past through. You guys have anything? Thank all your Zoomers for being here. Thank all your classroom persons for being here. I appreciate it very, very much. Hopefully you'll really take these concepts to heart and apply them. You know them and you have already, you knew all this before up here, but now you need to make it work, please.
So you said, just to recap on the,
Commercial property managers, okay.
no, on the paragraph 11 of special provisions, right?
Yeah, that's where you practice your creative writing skills.
And I can do that on my rebating skills.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But now rebate is in the buyer representation agreement, which is paragraph 17. So don't get your paragraphs confused.
We can open a casino up downtown.
Absolutely. Downtown Plano, so it's convenient. There ought to be good vacant land somewhere over there.
Downtown Plano?
Well, now you're vacant land downtown Plano. How much vacant land anywhere is there? Plano.
How about right over here?
What? Should be good.
They can just turn the event center into a casino.
That's what you just advised. It's a good idea. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thing turned off.
Yes, we need to turn it off. Thank you.
Ray Henderson.
How do you turn it off?
Who's Ray Henderson?
Ray Henderson?
I
Where
am.
you at, Ray?
I'm here. I've been listening to this whole time.
Hey, you got it? Okay. You should come
How you-
into the office sometime.
Yeah, I'll be into the office maybe this week. Yeah, probably
Yeah.
tomorrow.